lot of people's way of thinking, the flow of human history moves along without any rhyme or reason. Random events like the Twin Towers, or Hurricane Katrina, or the latest election, or violence in the Middle East, they seem to grab center stage and dramatically alter the course of human history. But are these events really random? Or is there something more going on behind the scenes? What if somebody actually knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Today on Disclosure, we're going to answer that question. For the longest time, human beings believed unfalteringly that all swans are always white. And the reason we believed it is because we'd never seen anything else. Every swan really was always white. But then in 1697, a Dutch explorer suddenly discovered black swans in Western Australia, and the white swan theory was down the drain. After that discovery, John Stuart Mill, the famous political philosopher, started using the term black swan to describe widely held beliefs that are suddenly proven false. And building on that, economist Nassim Taleb used the term black swan to describe unpredictable events. Stuff like 9/11, big stuff that radically alters the way we think or the way we live. The whole idea is that nothing is predictable. A small number of black swans, Taleb says, explains almost everything in our world, from the success of ideas and religions to the dynamics of historical events. You know, to a large extent, I've got to agree. A lot of the big changes on planet Earth seem to happen because of massive, unpredictable events. But how much of human history actually is unpredictable? I mean, I haven't got a clue if I'll be breathing tomorrow, not with 100% certainty. So what chance do I have of predicting big global events? Psychics and future trend experts say they can figure it out, that they can predict the future. But our track record of accurate prediction is pretty abysmal. Even Nostradamus, the famous Nostradamus, was less than 10% accurate when it comes right down to it. 10%. So what are the odds that any of the rest of us are going to get anything right? But does that mean that nobody knows? Or is it possible that somebody has already seen the future? Today we're going to look at an ancient prophecy that has me convinced beyond any shadow of a doubt that most of the future has already been written, that somebody really did see it. But just before we get to that, it is time for the Bible in the News. Berean Academy from Houston, Texas, made quite a stir in the news last week because of their religious faith. It turns out that their basketball team is really good. So good that they made it to the parochial school state championships. And that's where dreams of winning were suddenly challenged by matters of faith. You see, Berean Academy is an Orthodox Jewish school, and they suddenly found themselves scheduled to play against Dallas Covenant at 9 o'clock on Friday night, after the beginning of the Sabbath. Of course, for those who observe the seventh-day Sabbath, the Sabbath of the Ten Commandments, that creates a real problem. You just don't play basketball on the Sabbath. Observing the Sabbath is part of their everyday lives, said the coach of the boys. It's not negotiable. The Sabbath begins Friday night at sundown, and it goes till Saturday night sundown, so Berean Academy decided they would rather shine in the court of God's opinion than on the basketball court during the Sabbath hours. Now, the team did appeal to the organization to accommodate their religious beliefs, but the 9 members of the agency's board refused to make an accommodation, in spite of the fact that Dallas Covenant was also willing to reschedule. Now, if Berean Academy could not play, their spot would be given to another school. In fact, it would be given to the school they had just beaten to earn their spot in the semifinals. And that's how things stood late last week, when a number of parents, quite independent of the school itself, made a legal appeal to the board to reconsider their inflexible stand. As it turns out, the board did make an accommodation last year for another parochial school, Arlington Burton Adventist Academy. Seventh-day Adventists, as you can guess by the name, also keep the seventh-day Sabbath. And when it came to light that the board had made exceptions for Adventists and not for Jews, well, that was a little embarrassing. So late last week, under the scrutiny of the media, the board finally changed their minds and, in my humble opinion, did the right thing. Barron Academy's game was rescheduled for 2 in the afternoon on Friday, which completely moved the game out of the Sabbath hours. It was a simple fix for something that probably didn't have to become a nationwide story. And how did the newly scheduled game turn out? Barron Academy won last Friday afternoon. But in my opinion, they scored a much bigger victory for young people everywhere who choose to live a life of substance and a life of faith. Now, tonight on the program, I've got my friend Cliff Goldstein joining me again, and we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 7. Is global chaos really just a matter of chance, or is there something else at play? We're going to hold a drawing tonight for the book The Presence. It's a compelling book that's a must-read for anyone who wonders whether human history has purpose or direction. Now, in order to qualify for that drawing, you've got to call me during the program. Now, buckle your seatbelts. We're going to be back in just a moment.
Is this Jesus really coming back?
I wonder what really happens when you die.
Is this religion stuff really relevant in my life?
It couldn't be easier to join the conversation online on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
Today I've got author Cliff Goldstein back on the program, a guy who quite literally wrote the book on some of the major prophetic themes found in the book of Daniel. Cliff, I'm glad you're back on the program with me today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at probably one of the biggest prophecies found anywhere in the Bible. We're going to look at Daniel chapter 7 tonight. And I got to say, Cliff, that out of all of the prophecies of the Bible, all the passages of the Bible, this is one chapter that actually made a believer out of me.
Well, it's understandable. I don't know how any rational person, especially you go to Daniel 2, then you go to Daniel 7, I don't know how any rational person with an open mind can read this and not come away, wow. Wow. As you were saying, a physicist once said it's very difficult to make an accurate prediction. Yeah. Especially about the future. Okay. And here you've got this stuff laid out centuries in advance. It's
2,500 years and not one bit of it's been wrong.
And you think about it too. If you were God, and you got these little munchkins, us down here, okay, and you're trying to give us rational reasons to believe, what broader, firmer, more unshakable foundation could you give to humans than the history of the world? You see what I'm saying? It's broad, it's firm, it's locked in the past. Even God can't change the past, and so it's very, people say, sure, we have to live by faith, but we've got very good rational reasons.
The weight, there is weight of evidence in favor of believing that somebody knows, there's somebody out there, that God is real. You mentioned a moment ago that it's like Daniel 2, and I think you've mentioned to me in the past that, while Daniel 7 was a bell ringer for me, Daniel 2 was for you, and those two prophecies really run parallel to each other. Yeah,
Daniel 7 is basically, Daniel 2 really forms the basic prophetic outline for just about everything else that comes in the book of Daniel. Daniel 2, everything else sort of extrapolates on Daniel 2, takes it deeper, looks at some of the same things from different perspectives. But really, in many ways, it all comes back to this firm foundation, for lack of a better phrase, for Daniel, that's built into Daniel 2. And again, it appeals to rational thinking.
It really does. Now, if you missed our discussion on Daniel 2, go to the archives at our website. It's at hopetv.org/disclosure and go look at that. That prophecy, in short, is a statue that outlines the kingdoms of the world: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the divided Western Roman Empire, and then a stone that fills the earth represents the kingdom of God being established. You're saying that this extrapolates on that. We're going to build on that.
You know, and you think about it, too, from our perspective. The Bible was right about the first kingdom, the second kingdom, the third kingdom, the last kingdom. The only one from our perspective that hasn't been fulfilled yet is the final one, God's kingdom. Well, if I were a gambling man, he was right on this one, right on this one, right on this one, right on this one, it would seem pretty silly to bet against them on the last one, the most important one, God's eternal kingdom.
You know, I've actually seen people who make odds look at the odds of getting all that right, and it's infinitesimally impossible to get that right. It's in the trillions or quadrillions, one to, you know. You don't guess this stuff by accident. Let's take a look at Daniel chapter 7. I want to let me lead right into it in verse 1. This actually backtracks, doesn't it? I mean, history's gone by. Belshazzar has fallen in chapter 5. We've met Darius, king of the Medes, in chapter 6, but then Daniel backs up a little bit. In the first year, verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke saying, I love that, telling the main fact. It's almost like, okay, there's a bunch more that we didn't get to see, and I can't wait to meet Daniel and ask, well, what didn't you write down?
Yeah, really.
Daniel spoke saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. All right, there's a lot in there. He's dreaming, he sees water, there's wind blowing on the water, these beasts or animals start coming up out of the sea. What do some of those symbols mean? What does Daniel see?
Well, you know, this is not a vision. This is not, we're not getting a zoology lesson here. Okay. This is prophecy. This is prophetic. It's symbolism. There's symbols all the way through. And first of all, in the Bible, winds. We often hear the phrase winds of strife. Right. Which is a phrase we use now. Well, probably, I suppose if you probably were to really look at the etymology of that, it would probably be something taken from the Bible. But winds deal with the concept of...
I think the word here is actually ruach.
Ruach, yeah, wind, yeah. Well, it could also be spirit, breath, and so on. But also the word also means winds. And so you've got winds of heaven strove upon the sea. So you've got wind denoting action, turmoil, so on. The great sea in the Bible... Often water represents multitudes of people and so on. So
actually, there's a cue dropped over in Revelation 17. The waters you saw represent nations.
Daniel and Revelation are so much of the book of Revelation is lifted or, is influenced by the book of Daniel. So you're dealing here obviously with really, I'd say, political and military turmoil in a very populated part of the world.
Okay, so beasts are coming up out of this water. You know, I'd actually heard at one point that in Jewish thinking, at least at some point in history, thinking changes over the centuries, but at least at one point in history, there was this view that Israel is at the center of the world, and all these Gentile nations are around it, and they thought of themselves as an island in a sea of Gentiles. And I just sometimes wonder.
I know the feeling.
An island in a sea of Gentiles. But here's the wind blowing on the water. These beasts are coming up out of the sea, and as we watch these beasts come up, basically, this is world history. God is showing, this is what, it looks tumultuous, but there's something going on that, Daniel, you need to recognize. These animals start crawling up out of the water, and those beasts or animals, they represent kings or kingdoms.
Yeah, it comes out and says it. It says it. There's not really a lot of guesswork on that because it interprets it for us.
Verse 17, these great beasts, which are 4 kings which will arise. Verse 23, the 4th beast will be the 4th kingdom. No guesswork. I sometimes wish that more Christians would do a little less guesswork. They'll run with a symbol. Here's a beast, and so they run to the computer in Belgium. And But context is everything.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I need faith to believe in a lot of things about my belief system, things that I do have to take on faith, but this is world history. I mean, you can go to the secular history books. I've done this. When I first became a believer, people were studying with these and interpreting this with me. I went to the library. I got secular books that didn't have any particular agenda.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to be a believer to know. You can go back and look at history of the ancient world, and there was the great empire of Babylon.
Right.
And then we know that after Babylon fell, the Medo-Persian Empire came.
Right, right.
And then after the the battle between the Greeks and the Medo-Persians, that's some of the most documented history, and the Greek nation beat the Medo-Persians. And then after the downfall of Greece, well, everybody knows about the history of the pagan Roman Empire with the battles with Carthage, and slowly but surely that nation of Rome took over the whole world.
What you've just given me is what we looked at in Daniel chapter 2.
That's what I said.
All
Daniel,
predicted.
Yeah, and you'll notice this is a lot more detail than Daniel 2.
Let's look at it. We've got about 4 minutes to the break. Let's take a look at it really quick. I'm going to encourage you at home to take the time to read this in detail. But Cliff, you've just outlined it. The first animal that crawls up is a lion with eagle's wings.
Okay.
Right.
Babylon, ancient Babylon.
Interesting that Jeremiah, when he describes, it's in Jeremiah chapter 4, when he describes Nebuchadnezzar coming to sack the city of Jerusalem, he calls him an eagle and a lion.
Wow.
It's a fairly well-known.
Yeah, I am.
As a matter of fact, I think years ago I was in a museum, there were winged lions all over.
Sure. I think that's a symbol of ancient Babylon.
It's a well-known symbol of ancient Babylon. Okay, so that's the first one. That's Babylon, 605, 539 roughly BC. Next one in verse 5 is a bear, raised up on one side, got 3 ribs in the mouth.
Okay, well, that's been interpreted pretty much through the centuries as the Medo-Persian Empire, and up on one side is considered the lopsided because one was more powerful than the other.
Persians came later, but they became dominant.
Yeah, and then the 3 ribs, they believe, was it Lydia? I forgot, there were 3 other...
Lydia, Egypt, Babylon.
Things that were places that were crushed by, especially large nations that were crushed by the Medo-Persian power.
So very apropos symbol for the Medo-Persian Empire.
I don't think anybody living back then or living later who knew the history would have any problem understanding what that was.
Right. It's just after centuries of separation from when it was originally written, we get confused, but the original audience would get this.
Oh yeah.
Third one is in verse 6. All right, it is a leopard. It's a bit unusual. It's got 4 wings and 4 heads. Why would that be a great symbol for the next empire, which you said was Greece?
Yeah. Well, again, when you think of wings, what do you think of?
Well, it really is swiftness.
Swiftness, speed. You think of a leopard, what do you think of?
It's swiftness and speed.
Yeah, so you've got that. And then ultimately the 4 heads is understood. Again, it's fascinating because when Alexander the Great died, his empire was divided up by 4 of his generals. He didn't do this all by himself. He had these generals, and they pretty much divided up the world at that point, but they were fighting among themselves, and it split, and ultimately they collapsed as well.
Wow, so amazing. I find interesting, if you count all the heads here, and you go and look at a parallel passage over in Revelation 13, all the components are here. There's this beast that crawls out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's got the same number as here. That'll come up a little bit later tonight. We've got the leopard. It's the swiftness. Alexander the Great conquers the world in 4 years flat, I think, and it's just remarkable, 32 years of age. A 4th beast in verse 7. Huge iron teeth. Got to be the legs were of iron in Daniel too.
Parallel. Well, again, what is the last great power that comes up? It was the Roman Empire.
Right.
The Roman Empire. So that, again, was not a hard one to, you don't really need to guess at this. This is history laid out for you. And it's very interesting, too. If you take Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8, 3 of the 4 nations are named for us.
Yeah.
They're named for us. And then if you link Daniel, you go to the Gospels. Jesus comes in and pretty much gives us the name of the 4th empire as well. So if you put these together with the Gospels, you've got all 4 of these named for us in the Bible.
It is phenomenal. So we got Rome. Rome has, and we've got just seconds to go, Rome has 10 horns, and the statue, of course, really referenced the toes. Look at the toes, and when we studied that, the Western Roman Empire collapses, breaks in fragments. Horns were told, I think, a little bit later in the chapter. They're kings. The 10 horns are 10 kings, verse 24. The Western Roman Empire fragments. In a moment, we're going to... This has all been reviewed, and in a moment we're going to come back because now it's going to throw us a curveball. We're going to get something that was not in Daniel 2, and this is really what takes my breath away. So, all right. Daniel 2, it's parallel. Everything's been reviewed thus far. Now, tonight, if you call in, you're going to get a chance a little bit later to join our discussion. And if you do call in, you get a chance at one of our copies of The Presence. I love plugging this, Cliff, because I wrote it. This is up for some sort of a Pulitzer Prize because, it's just You want to win this book. You want to call us, 888-730-HOPE. We'll take your questions in a moment. 707-200-1099. If you call in now, you'll be ready for it when we get to taking our phone calls. Mention that you want the book, The Presence. You'll be entered into the draw. We're going to be back with more of a discussion on Daniel 7 in a moment. We're going to see what surprise comes now that the Western Roman Empire has broken into those fragments.
Get full disclosure on today's topic with Hope Channel study guides. Go to hopetv.org/disclosure and click on the free offers tab at the top of the webpage. There you'll find a list of resources that will enhance your Bible study. Just fill out the form and we'll email the requested materials straight to your inbox.
And we're back. I'm with Cliff Goldstein, author, speaker, and all-around great guy. And yeah, he paid me $20 to say that on live TV. Disclosure is live every Thursday from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We want to hear from you. In a few minutes, we'll let you join the discussion. You can try and stump Cliff on his knowledge of the book of Daniel. Think of the hardest question you can. Call in to 888-730-HOPE, 4673, or text me at 707-200-1099. If your question's not hard enough, I'll make it even harder. HopeTV.org/disclosure if you want to find us online. Cliff is eager to answer the hardest question you can think of. All right, Cliff, let's get back into...
Took the words out of my mouth, Shawn.
Yeah, I tell you. You were challenging me during the break on the Pulitzer Prize. You don't believe I got a Pulitzer for this.
Well, you said you were nominated for it. I didn't believe that either.
No. Yeah. But it's a useful book. I have to say that. I wrote it. I'll tell you what's in here, though, is that we've noticed that the sanctuary is a huge theme through all of prophecy. And this was written to help people understand why that's important. Yeah. All right. We're in verse 8 of Daniel 7. And we've seen all the progression of world empires, and the Roman Empire has the 10 horns. It breaks into 10 fragments. It breaks into the Western Roman Empire after 476. Just disintegrates. It's gone. Becomes the modern nations of Western Europe. Verse 8 is where we're headed now. Here's the surprise, the new element that wasn't in Daniel 2. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. That's quite a prophecy, isn't it? And I guess the question is, what in the world does that represent? What are the clues that we have as to what in the world comes out of the Roman Empire that matches answers to this description?
Well, see, you said something very important there, what comes out of the Roman Empire. If you remember Daniel 2, you got one metal, and then another metal, and then another, and then you got the iron. And then the iron in the feet and toe, in the legs, the iron extends all the way to the end, even though it mixes with clay. But the point is, the power that comes up after grease stays all the way through until the end.
There's some element always there.
All the way through. Now, this little horn power, it's very interesting. You got a discussion of one beast, and then another, and then another, then the fourth beast. Then everything really focuses in on this little horn power. There's more emphasis put on this little horn power, more details given to it than any of the other beasts. But the crucial thing to remember is this little horn power is not a separate beast. It's part of the fourth beast. So this is clearly a Roman power that comes out of pagan Rome.
Interesting.
It's part of Rome. It's the fourth beast. It goes all the way to the end.
It's continuation. You know what? There seems to be an element of continuation in these prophecies regardless. If you go back to Daniel 2, it says that all those metals are all destroyed together. There's a continuity from Babylon all the way down to the very end, and something carries over. And it seems like at the end, God deals with the whole package, and it carries through. Interesting. So it comes out of Rome. What are some of the, look at some of the things that identify what this is. And I want to be very careful because people jump to conclusions. You know, if you go into a Christian bookstore now and try and pick up books on prophecy, everybody's leaping to conclusions and calling names, and I want to be very careful that we don't do that. But we look at the evidence. Horns were kings and kingdoms and political powers, but it says this is a little one. This is a little power. And it says it has eyes like a man. Now, what are eyes symbolic of in prophecy and in the Scriptures?
Well, I'm not sure here. Eyes like the eyes of a man. I don't know. How would you understand
Well,
that?
The eyes of the Lord run to and from the earth.
Intelligence.
Yeah.
Intelligence.
Here's something not
and
using
so
a
on.
sword,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
using intrigue
Yeah.
more than the sword.
And with a mouth speaking great things, that implies a, some translate that a blasphemous things and so on. It speaks of a religious dimension here, I think.
Yeah, I think there's no question. If you look at the parallel passage in Revelation chapter 13, it actually says blasphemy. It's arrogant. It's blasphemous. And biblically speaking, blasphemy really was claiming the attributes of God or diminishing God's power. They accused Jesus of blasphemy. Right? They said, you make yourself God. That's blasphemy. So it's really claiming something more for ourselves or diminishing God, it would seem.
It's very interesting. There's just a lot of details put on this little horn power, which is still part of the fourth beast.
Well, it says in verse 8 and in verse 24, and end of verse 24, it subdues 3 kings. In verse 8, it says it rips up 3 of the other horns. So it does something to get rid of some of these fragments of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, obviously, there was, when Rome fell apart, there's a vacuum, and the people are rushing to fill it. And obviously, this little horn power uproots some of these other kings, and it becomes the dominant force at that time, after the breakup of the pagan Roman Empire.
Right.
But it's a continuation. It's still part of the fourth beast.
It sure is. We know that this has got to show up in the Western world somewhere, right? Because it says it comes up among the 3 horns.
And then in verse 25, and she'll speak great words against the Most High. Okay, first it said great words. Now it's great words against the Most High. So it's really showing the blasphemous element here, which, as you said, links it directly to Revelation.
This is not just a political power.
No, obviously not.
This is religious. It says in verse 21 and 25 that it makes war with the saints. It persecutes the saints. Revelation 13 says something similar.
So it's a persecuting power, persecuting God's people. The saints here doesn't mean saints as we often think of saints today, but that's a biblical term for generally God's faithful people.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, it starts to be a very chilling picture.
Sure.
And I'm sure a lot of lights are going on as we're going through this.
And see, it's interesting too. People forget this is history.
Right.
This isn't future.
Right.
We're dealing with now is an historical entity. There's an unfortunate tendency in the past 200 years for Bible interpreters to automatically take all this stuff and just skip over the whole history of Christianity, the whole history of, and just suddenly place everything in the future. You can't. You've got Babylon, you've got Medo-Persia, you've got Greece, you've got Rome. You just can't suddenly carve out 2,000 years and stick it way out in the future somewhere that hasn't even happened
That's right.
yet.
Now, if I were to say, hey, you know what, it's 70 miles to my house, and you're driving there and you've been going for 2 days, and you say, Shawn, I forgot to tell you, I put a 2,000-mile gap between 69 and 70.
Yeah.
It doesn't make logical sense. These things start in the day of the prophet, and they go clear down to the end of time.
It's a continual. It's the history of the world, one after another, Very general, but specific enough so you can know what it's talking about.
Matter of fact, it talks about a time period, time times half a time, a year, 2 years, half a year. You find that all through prophecy regarding this particular power. It's 42 months in the book of Revelation. It's 1,260 days.
So here, too, is where people get thrown off. They take this as, time and dividing of time, 3.5 literal years. But again, you got beasts here. You got, dragons. You've got beasts with iron teeth, leopards with wings, and so on. It's prophetic. It's symbolic. So that should be a hint alone that we're not dealing with literal time here, but this is prophetic time and the day-year principle.
Day-year principle.
A known
it all
biblical
through
principle.
Scripture.
Sure.
Most scholars agree in many passages, a day is a year.
Sure.
This is talking about a period of time longer than a millennium.
Sure.
So something that comes out of the collapse of the Roman Empire, it retains some of those old kingdoms. It's a political and a religious power. It speaks great words. Cliff, I remember when I read this is one of the things that really made me sit up and pay attention and made a believer out of me. When it dawned on me, my word, I know what this is talking about. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed reading this, and I was not really a Christian. And I'm thinking, I know what this is talking about. It's so obvious. This is talking about us.
Sure.
It's us.
Not me.
No, it's you too, man.
I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish.
But look at this. I mean, look at the description. We saw, I mean, last week we were looking at the 4 horsemen, and we saw that God was honest enough to say that there was a black horse and a pale horse and a time where Christianity would compromise. The story of the Bible is God tells the truth about his people. In the Old Testament,
All the way
Israel
through.
goes astray. Why isn't the New Testament that we like to ignore? We're looking over the fence, well, who's the little horn? Got to be some dictator that shows up in secular Europe. God tells the truth about us. This is our Christian history. Did we persecute? Yeah, we sure did. Did we make boastful claims? We sure did. Did we misbehave as Christians? You know, my personal belief is, Cliff, it's probably about time that Christians owned up to this, admitted it, apologized, and got on with life.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the history of the Christian church hasn't been one that, in many ways, you could be very proud of. You know, fortunately, I learned a long time ago. I made a big separation between Jesus and people that necessarily profess their own name. And you're right. I don't have to look at anybody else. I could get up and look in the mirror in the morning and know the difference between what I profess, what I claim to believe, and the Lord I claim to serve, and what I'm really like in real life. So you multiply that by endless more, and you've got Christian history.
And it's not the end of the story. We're going to have to move along. Again, we're moving so quickly in these programs.
Oh, yeah, you can spend a lot of time.
Verse 9, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow. The hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. Verse 10, a fiery stream issue came forth from before him. Thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. What's this next event?
Well, you're going along, you got one kingdom and another, and then you've got the Bible, the Lord saying, hey, there's a lot of injustice, there's a lot of evil, there's a lot of wicked in the world, but ultimately at the end of time, God is a God of justice, and judgment will be meted out. This is not going to go on forever, because at the result of this judgment, God's eternal kingdom is established. The last kingdom is established. So God's saying, okay, hang in there, because ultimately justice will be done.
Interesting. You know, I'm looking at who wrote this. It's Daniel. He's in captivity. The Jews are in captivity. David was supposed to reign forever. The house of David was supposed to reign forever. And pagan kings are ruling. And now God says, look, there's going to be another pagan king and another pagan king and another pagan empire. And then he has to watch God's own people going squirrely yet again. But at the end of the day, God closes down the shop and there's a judgment. Why do we need a judgment?
Well, you know, look at the world. Look at the world. It was a philosopher once said, if you only had one premise, that God is just, you have to believe in some kind of afterlife, because we don't see the justice here. Okay, we don't see the justice here. And this is God's way of saying to us. See, it's interesting, too, if you read it, he says, in the chapter it says, judgment is given in favor of the saints. And in the Bible, the concept of justice is two-edged. There's punishment for the wicked and vindication for the righteous. And you see this here. There is ultimate judgment on the persecuting power, but then ultimately, too, judgment is given in favor of the saints. So in many ways, this judgment is good news for God's people.
Hold that thought. I want to come back to that just after the break. Judgment is good news for God's people. In just a moment, you're going to get a chance to call in, 888-730-HOPE, or text me your questions at 707-200-1099. We're going to play Stump the Goldstein and see if you can't come up with something he cannot answer. Make it as tough as you possibly can. And when you call in, make sure you mention the book, The Presence. You get a chance to go home with one of those, or we'll send one out to you, and I think Cliff might even autograph it for you.
You wrote it. You autographed it.
We'll put your baby picture in there for everybody to enjoy. I want you to put Cliff through his paces. We'll be right back.
Get full disclosure on today's topic with Hope Channel study guides. Go to hopetv.org/disclosure and click on the free offers tab at the top of the webpage. There you'll find a list of resources that will enhance your Bible study. Just fill out the form and we'll email the requested materials straight to your inbox.
As for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon I cry out in distress, and He hears my voice.
I wonder, when is the end of the world?
Do I have to live like this the rest of my life?
Is my destiny something I can change? Call us at 1-888-730-HOPE and get full disclosure on your question.
And we're back. We're looking at Daniel 7. We have given, I think, Cliff, one of the most irresponsible Bible studies in the history of Bible study because
it's your TV program.
Yeah, I know. We just covered all of Daniel 7 in about, I don't know, what, 12 and a half minutes?
Well, you know, in a sense, though, Shawn, there's something to that because it's giving us a very broad sweep of world history. I mean, it's covering the history of the world. In how many verses are in the book in Daniel 7? You've got 28 verses. 28 verses, it's basically giving you the history of the world, end-time judgment, and God's, and it's taking you into the future. So Daniel itself is going through things pretty quick. So you could be excused for going through it as well pretty quick.
I think we'll get a chance to go back in more detail. Next week, we're going to look at Daniel 8, and it's going to cover some of the same ground again and give us a little more detail. But we've looked at Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the fragmented Western Roman Empire, a little horn power, which is a religious and political power, a persecuting power, and it looks a lot like us, our own Christian history. You know, a text message came in during the break, and somebody asking, you know, can't you get more specific? Name names, who did that, who persecuted? And you know what, I think the answer is still us. If I look at Daniel's own attitude in Daniel chapter 9, he was not responsible for the sins of Israel. He wasn't breaking the Sabbath with them and doing those things. And yet when he prays, he says, we have sinned. It's time for Christians for us to all own up and say, man, we've done this. Let's talk about judgment. You said just before we broke that it's good news. And I know that that thought is new to somebody watching tonight. How is judgment good? I mean, I have faced judgment once or twice, and it wasn't great news.
Yeah. Well, I guess it all depends, too, on well, I guess the bottom line is ultimately who your judge is. And if we have you know, we're told not to judge. Why are we told not to judge? Because we don't know all the facts. Okay, but there's a God who knows all the facts, a God, though, who has revealed His love to us, a God who has revealed He's a God of justice. I personally am very thankful of the promises of ultimate judgment, the promises of justice being done. Again, coming from the Jewish background and the whole weight of that, I want to know that the people who got away with this in this life are going to have to, they might have gotten away with it here, but there's going to be a God who's going to judge them.
I've heard people say, though, Cliff, you know, look, God is love, and He's too nice.
Yeah.
He's too nice for any retributive justice. I mean,
tell that to the ancient Israelites. Tell that to them with some of the stuff that they suffered through, you know.
Well, so is God just settling the score? Is that what it is? Is judgment God settling the score?
I'm willing to concede that there are aspects of God's judgment I can't understand. But God says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. Okay, I mean, if you love somebody,
right,
and you see somebody viciously attacking them, being evil to them, is it just, well, I love the evildoer so much that I'm going to just let him do what he wants? It doesn't work that way. I'm willing to concede that God's justice is something that I don't fully understand, but I take great, in fact, I had a sermon once that I preached called that, The Promise of Hell, okay? And it was just, I have to ultimately trust and believe that the justice and judgment that I don't see here. There's so much injustice in this world. There's so much that goes along that's not taken care of. And yet, people say, well, it's just a pie in the sky hope you have. Well, it's a pie in the sky hope in the sense I have it because the Bible tells me about it. And if God ultimately doesn't bring justice at some point, then we have to accept the fact that we live in a totally unjust world and there will never be justice done. And if you can live with that, fine. But I have a Bible, and my Bible tells me about a God who that's not what God is like.
Well, I find it interesting is that everybody's got an inborn sense of justice. If somebody else has hurt us or done us wrong, there's this feeling, boy, that's got to be made right somehow, somewhere. And yet, we don't want that for us.
Yeah.
Right? You know, we want God to eliminate all the evil in the world, but if He really did that, at this moment, I mean, I wouldn't make it.
Yeah. Well, see, here's where you ultimately come into the gospel and the whole thing of the gospel. If we all got the justice, in a sense that, and this is the mystery of the gospel. This is the mystery of that even though we are wretched, we are bad, we've done bad things, God is willing to forgive us all. He made a provision to forgive us all at the cross.
So it wasn't just a dismissal of sin and evil.
No, the cross shows the ultimate consequence of sin and evil. That's what sin and evil led to.
Absolutely. Yeah. What is the take-home lesson for Cliff Goldstein in Daniel chapter 7?
You know, I remember a long time ago, or a number of years ago, I had just been doing some reading through the book of Daniel, reading it in the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and just reading it over and over, just reading it. And it was funny because I remember I was in Australia actually, and I was sitting outside and I was thinking about something and feeling a little anxious about something I was facing. And then I just remember I had just been reading so much in the book of Daniel, and it showed me that in the end, you know, it sounds like a fairy tale and they lived happily ever after, but in the end, it turns out good.
Yeah.
It turns out good.
Judgment in favor of God's people.
Yeah, so no matter how messed up things are here now, that in the long run, and we've got to look, I remember years ago before I was a believer, every now and then I used to sit there and think, where am I going to be a million years from now? You know, just wondering about the ultimate, you know, these transcendent questions, ultimate questions. And this, you know, the secular view, it all winds up, will end up being swallowed up by the same cold, uncaring forces that apparently created us. And
very hopeful.
Yeah, well, I suppose that would have been better than just continually going on, you know, in a miserable world with, you know, no hope at all. Yeah, but Daniel ultimately showed me that in the end, God will make it all right.
His kingdom is the final stop in this prophecy.
Yeah, and it's the one kingdom. See, all these other kingdoms come and go and come and go. And if you read it, it says a couple times, God's kingdom will never be destroyed, it'll never be taken away, it lasts forever. So all these other ones are here and gone.
All right, we have got a YouTube question that's come in. We're going to try and squeeze in the question before the break. I don't know if we'll have time to answer, but let's listen to this.
In Daniel 7, it states that God's throne has wheels. Why does it have wheels?
Okay.
Why does God's throne have wheels?
You probably set him up to make a difficult question for me.
Yeah.
Well, that
you got 2 minutes.
Well,
or less.
You know, we're dealing with symbolism here. We're dealing with, as we said, all the way through symbolism. And it does give the idea of movement.
Right.
Does give the idea. If you read this, you do see that the Ancient of Days moving, the Son of Man, that's a Hiphel form or a Hafel form in the Aramaic, he's brought before. You've got movement here. And to be too dogmatic about that now, I wouldn't want to be too dogmatic about that now, but I don't want to be too dogmatic about it at any time.
Oh, go ahead, be dogmatic.
No, I'm not that dogmatic about anything. Me, you know, I'm getting too old to get too dogmatic about things. I've been wrong too many times on too many things. But I think in many ways when, as I said, these chapters don't exist in isolation.
Right.
When you parallel, as we'll do next week, this chapter with Daniel 8,
right,
which brings in a whole different symbols for the beast, it brings in a whole other element, the sanctuary. Okay, I'm plugging your book here.
Thank you. Well, we got to plug it because we're running out of time.
It brings in the same, but that makes more sense. But there is the idea of some kind of movement, and I mean that's what the imagery is. Exactly what it means.
All right. We'll be back in a moment to take your questions live. You can text me. You can phone me. You can phone Cliff. I'll give his cell phone number after the break. And don't forget, we're going to have a draw for the presents, but only if you call in during this program. You don't want to miss this. I mean, a Pulitzer Prize nomination. You heard Cliff say it right here. We'll be back. We're looking at the judgment now in Daniel chapter 7. Buckle your seatbelts. We'll be right back.
Get full disclosure on today's topic with Hope Channel study guides. Go to hopetv.org/disclosure and click on the free offers tab at the top of the webpage. There you'll find a list of resources that will enhance your Bible study. Just fill out the form and we'll email the requested materials straight to your inbox.
Is this Jesus really coming back?
I wonder what really happens when you die.
Is this religion stuff really relevant in my life?
It couldn't be easier to join the conversation online on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. Though he may stumble, he will not fall. For the Lord upholds him with his hand.
And we're back. We're looking at questions on Daniel 7. We're looking at the judgment in particular down at the end of that. And Cliff, we're going to still try and stump you. Some more questions have come in.
Sure.
And these are tough ones. This is one that I've actually heard a lot. Can you talk about the role of Antiochus Epiphanes in Bible prophecy? And I guess that comes up anytime you see horns. And this really is a question that kind of relates to what we're going to talk to more next week. But people always want to know, is Antiochus Epiphanes in here? Is he the great evil of that horn?
The answer is easy. Antiochus Epiphanes is not in Daniel 7.
Well, how do you know that?
Because it's obvious. It's obvious
Well, I've heard people say that that horn is not Christianity. That horn is Antiochus Epiphanes.
I mean,
but it kind of gets it backwards, doesn't it?
Antiochus Epiphanes was this pipsqueak little king who wreaked some havoc for a little bit of time in a small corner of the Roman Empire. Made problems for the Jews for a while, but it's just you're dealing with major powers, and this little horn power here is ultimately destroyed in this final end-time judgment that leads to the second coming of Jesus. Antiochus Epiphanes was wiped out in the century and a half before Jesus came.
It doesn't fit the flow at all because we've got Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the fragmented Roman Empire, and a little horn.
You could fit Bugs Bunny in there faster than you could fit Antiochus Epiphanes. Seriously, it's a joke. Antiochus Epiphanes is a joke. It doesn't fit.
He actually has to come back. If he's in here somewhere, he would have to fall between the leopard and the fourth beast.
Oh yeah,
because he's one of the. He comes out of one of the four heads. He's one of the Seleucid kings, and it doesn't fit.
There's some who argue that you could find some aspects of him in some of the difficult prophecies in Daniel 11, and that's fine if you want to argue that, but. He doesn't. He has nothing to do with here. See, what happened with this, it's a very common interpretation. In fact, I pretty much guarantee you, and it's very unfortunate, that you could pick up almost any Bible commentary, and you will find them talking about Antiochus Epiphanes in here. And that's very interesting why that came about, because, as I said in the beginning, this is very powerful evidence here in these chapters for the existence of God. Very powerful evidence for supernatural, for a God who thousands of years before some of these events predicted it. Well, if you happen to be of a philosophical persuasion that doesn't believe in God, or doesn't believe that God can give you predicative prophecy, doesn't believe that God can tell you the future, you've got to deal with these prophecies here. And so what they do is they come up with the idea that these things all were historical. They all happened in the past, and that the author, most Bible scholars, or many of them, do not believe that this was a book written by a guy named Daniel who lived during the ancient Babylonian Empire. They put it in the time of Antiochus or even after Antiochus.
Because it blows their mind. If they put it in Daniel's day, they're going to have to admit that.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, so they come up with this thing. It's all written later, after the events, and then they're just deceiving us. They're making us sound like it's talking about the future when it's really a guy writing hundreds of years after the event, making it sound like it. Well, the problem with that is, particularly like when you get something like Daniel 2, they do that with Daniel 2, is even if somebody was writing in 165 BC, they did an awfully good job in predicting the breakup of the Roman Empire. You know, how they could have come up with that. So, I mean, hundreds of years in advance, in advance of that stuff. So, in other words, I think the power of God's predicative prophecy is so great, even this goofy theories that try to put the book of Daniel, written by somebody in the 2nd century BC, it doesn't work.
You know what I find interesting is that I know we flew over this very fast and said, look, the little horn answers to Christianity, particularly as we come out of the Roman Empire through the medieval period and so on. It really is us. But, I go back and read what church leaders were saying, and there were some. I think the Archbishop of Reggio at one point stands up in a council and says, we got to pay attention to this is us. And people start squirming a little bit. And all of a sudden people say, well, we really don't want it to be us, so we really got to say it's Antiochus Epiphanes. They start to sort of look for anything but the uncomfortable fact that we are being described.
Well, it's not politically correct. And as I said, they'll either put it all in the past or they'll stick it all.
Just to avoid.
The very common thing now is to put all this stuff way in the future.
All right, we got a couple of minutes. This came in, I think, by Facebook. The iron feet mixed with clay. This is a reference back to Daniel 2. Do you think it can also mean that the traditions and beliefs of the Roman Empire are mixed in with all mankind? And can it mean that that a blasphemous man arises from the horrific beast? My name is Alma. I already have Shawn's book. I don't know where did you find it in? It must have been in a garage sale, right?
She didn't say no. She didn't say she read it. She just said she's got it.
Has it. She's been watching Hope. All right.
That's a big
I
difference.
think you referenced this a little bit. Are there elements of the Roman Empire that stick through? I think you answered that a moment ago.
I mean, you've got the metal of the fourth beast comes all the way through until the end. So you've got that, and you've got the same element in Daniel 7, and you'll even find when we look next week at Daniel 8, the same principle. Absolutely. This power that comes up after Greece extends all the way to the end of time.
Let me try and squeeze in another question. We got 3 minutes left. It's by YouTube. Let's listen to this.
Daniel 7 verse 27 ends with everybody serving and obeying God. Why does God seem so intent on everybody obeying him?
Now there's a great question.
Yeah.
It ends with everybody serving and obey. It says obeying God.
Let me answer that. Good question.
We got 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Well, I'd have more if you would be quiet and let me talk.
Okay.
Everybody serve and obey. Serve and well, let me ask you something, ma'am. You think the world is in good shape? Look at the world. Look at what a mess this world is. Sickness, suffering, death, war, violence, and on and on and on and on. I mean, I just read something the other day, some stories that were horrific. This is the result of what happens when people don't obey God. Okay? So what's better? To live in a world where people do obey God, and we're promised that none of this stuff would have happened in the very beginning. If they would have obeyed, none of this would have happened. We're promised a world where this stuff isn't going to happen again. It'll be a world where people obey. It's not like God is some tyrant. Obey me, boom, 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 or I'm going to zap you. It's more like, look, I created this world. And see, here's the thing. God made us. He gave us something so sacred and so risky. God made us truly morally free. And to be truly free, I mean, truly free, means to be truly free means God will not force us. Now that comes with a risk. That comes with a very big risk. And look at the mess of because we abused the freedom that God had given us. So God wants us to obey him because he's given us the gift of freedom.
Right.
He's given us the gift of freedom. He says, okay, you've got this gift. I made you free because I want beings who could truly love. But woe, look at what happens if you abuse this gift. God wants us to obey him the same way when I had a child.
Right.
I wanted my child to obey me because if the kid went out and played with matches or ran out into the street, he was going to get burned or he was going to get run over.
And the experiment we've lived with proves the point that on our own we made a mess. Obeying God is not for the sake of God lording it over us. Cliff, I can't believe we're running out of time. The fastest Bible study in the history of studying Daniel chapter 7. We're going to come back next week and look at Daniel 8 and look at how they tie together. You're going to be back on the show. I'll give you more time to talk. I'll give you the whole show. And we're going to forge ahead. Now, don't go away just yet because we're going to be back in a heartbeat with just a few more thoughts from Daniel chapter 7, the good news of the judgment and what you can do about it. How will you stand in judgment? What is your decision at this moment? We're going to look at Daniel 7, just a few more thoughts. I'll be right back.
Get full disclosure on today's topic with Hope Channel study guides. Go to hopetv.org/disclosure and click on the free offers tab at the top of the web page. There you'll find a list of resources that will enhance your Bible study. Just fill out the form and we'll email the requested materials straight to your inbox.
When you suddenly pull back the curtains of the universe and see what's really going on behind the scenes, it pretty much leaves you speechless. Somebody really does know what's going to happen next. There really is a purpose to human existence and a definite direction to human history. You and I have been given the freedom to choose. We can make our own moral decisions, but the history of our planet has already been written well in advance. According to Daniel chapter 7, the progression of world powers finally comes to an end in the judgment hall of God Himself. You and I might be able to make our own decisions. We might be free to live our lives however we want, but that inborn sense of justice we all seem to have tells us that you cannot live your life with utter impunity. At some point, the books are opened and the judgment begins. Now, I know that's not a popular way of thinking anymore because we've been telling ourselves that how we live doesn't really matter. Do what you want. Live how you please. But think about it like this. Why do we feel a sense of outrage when other people get away with murder? Why do we want closure when somebody hurts us? We know that other people should have to answer for what they've done, so why do we think that we shouldn't? I know the thought is kind of frightening, and maybe that's why we want to pretend it will never actually happen. But let me ask you this, if absolutely everything in this prophecy has happened exactly as predicted, what are the chances that this part about the judgment is wrong? I think we all know it's going to happen. And here's the good news. By yourself, you know you couldn't make it. You know you don't have what it takes. But in 1 John chapter 2, Jesus offers to serve as your attorney. He'll work as your lawyer. And that means you can have the judge as your defense. And I don't know about you, but that sounds to me like God has actually stacked the judgment in your favor. He's not trying to lose people. He's trying to get you into that eternal kingdom. But you know, honestly, He's not going to force the issue. He's going to let you decide how you want to face life's record. Do you want to face it by yourself? Or would you rather have the Lamb of God submit His own spotless record on your behalf? That's a choice you've got to make. That's a choice that you need to consider right now at this moment tonight, before that last segment of the prophecy comes to pass. God loves you. He won't force it. The choice is entirely up to you tonight. What are you going to do? Jesus offers to represent you in that judgment. You can't make it on your own. He's asking you, will you choose Him? Tonight, I'm Shawn Boonstra, and you've been watching Disclosure.